Before recorded empires and written chronicles, something remarkable was already unfolding across the ancient world. In places separated by oceans and thousands of years, human societies were shaping stone landscapes and architecture with a level of intention that still feels strangely calculated today. Massive structures appear where technology should have been limited, and symbols repeat across distant cultures that supposedly never met. Entire complexes align with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, as if the sky itself was part of the blueprint. These discoveries are not myths. They are excavated, measured, and documented. Yet the closer researchers examine them, the more questions appear. Methods remain unclear. Purposes remain debated. And the deeper the timeline is explored, the more the ancient world begins to look far more sophisticated than once imagined. High in the rugged mountains of southern Peru, far from the crowded tourist paths that lead to Machu Picchu, lies a lesser-known archaeological site that continues to puzzle historians and archaeologists. Near the remote Andean settlements surrounding Sayhuite monolith, a massive carved stone rests quietly among the hills. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a large weathered boulder. But as the eye adjusts and begins to follow the intricate carvings across its surface, a far more complex story begins to emerge. The Sayhuite monolith is one of the most enigmatic artifacts associated with the Inca civilization. Estimated to weigh around 20 tons and carved from extremely hard diorite stone, the monolith is covered with an astonishing network of miniature carvings, over 200 individual shapes etched across its rounded surface. These carvings include terraces, channels, pools, stair-like structures, animal figures, and geometric formations that appear to mimic landscapes. When viewed from above, the entire surface resembles a detailed three-dimensional topographic model, as if an entire valley had been condensed into stone. The level of detail is remarkable. Some channels are only a few centimeters wide, yet run with smooth precision across the surface of the rock, connecting tiny basins and miniature reservoirs. Certain sections resemble stepped agricultural terraces, strikingly similar to those seen throughout the Andes. Others appear to depict rivers flowing through valleys, while clusters of shapes resemble settlements or ceremonial platforms. The arrangement is far too deliberate to be random decoration. Instead, it suggests a carefully planned system, one that required both technical knowledge and extraordinary craftsmanship. One of the most widely discussed interpretations among archaeologists is that the Sayhuite monolith functioned as a kind of hydraulic model. The Inca were renowned for their mastery of water engineering, building complex irrigation and drainage systems across steep mountainous terrain. At sites such as Deepen, water still flows today through channels constructed centuries ago, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of gravity flow, control, and stonework. Some researchers believe the Sayhuite monolith may have been used to simulate these systems. When water is poured onto certain parts of the carved stone, it travels through the channels and cascades into the miniature pools exactly as real water would move through a valley. If this interpretation is correct, the monolith may represent an ancient engineering tool, essentially a physical model, used to test how water might move across a landscape before large-scale construction began. In modern engineering, scale models and digital simulations are used to analyze water flow before building dams or irrigation networks. The Sayhuite monolith could represent an early equivalent of this concept, carved not in plastic or digital code, but in solid stone. Yet the mystery deepens when considering the precision required to produce such a model. Diorite is one of the hardest stones commonly used in ancient architecture, significantly more difficult to carve than limestone or sandstone. Creating hundreds of fine grooves, channels, and miniature structures would have required an enormous amount of labor and control. The Inca are known to have used stone tools, hammerstones, and abrasive sand techniques to shape rock, but the degree of precision seen on the monolith raises questions about how such detailed work was accomplished. Another puzzle concerns the design itself. If the monolith truly represents a geographic model, then it must have been planned carefully before carving began. Unlike building structures block by block, carving a single stone allows very little room for error. One incorrect cut could disrupt the entire layout. Yet the Sayhuite monolith displays a remarkably coherent arrangement of features, suggesting that its creators possessed a clear conceptual plan long before the first tool touched the surface of the rock. Not all researchers agree that the monolith served purely practical engineering purposes. In Andean cosmology, water held deep spiritual significance. Rivers were believed to connect sacred landscapes, and mountain springs were often associated with divine forces. Because of this cultural context, some scholars propose that the monolith may have had a ceremonial function. Instead of merely demonstrating water flow, it may have symbolized the sacred relationship between land, water, and the cosmos. In this interpretation, pouring water over the carved channels might have formed part of ritual performances, perhaps reenacting the movement of life-giving water across the mountains. The miniature terraces and valleys carved into the stone could represent sacred geography and artistic expression of how the Inca understood their world. Rather than a technical blueprint, the monolith might have served as a symbolic landscape used during religious ceremonies dedicated to fertility, agriculture, and rainfall. Adding to the mystery is the location of the artifact itself. The Sayhuite site sits within a region that was once an important ceremonial and administrative area during the late Inca period. The surrounding hills contain other carved stones, platforms, and architectural remains, suggesting that the site may have held ritual significance. However, unlike more famous Inca cities, Sayhuite was never developed into a massive urban center. Its quieter landscape raises the possibility that it functioned primarily as a specialized ceremonial or experimental space. Over the decades, researchers have proposed many theories about the monolith's purpose. Some suggest it was a training device for Inca engineers learning to design irrigation systems. Others believe it could represent a model of a specific valley or agricultural region, perhaps used by planners responsible for expanding the empire's farming infrastructure. A few even argue that it may have served as a form of ancient teaching tool, allowing knowledge of water management to be demonstrated visually to apprentices. Despite years of study, none of these explanations fully resolves the mystery. No written records from the Inca period describe the monolith or its intended use. Much of what is known about Inca engineering comes from archaeological evidence rather than historical documents. As a result, the Sayhuite monolith remains open to interpretation, its meaning carved into stone, but its story partially lost to time. What is certain is that the artifact reveals a level of intellectual and technical sophistication often underestimated in ancient civilizations. Whether it served as a hydraulic experiment, a sacred ritual object, or a hybrid of both, the monolith demonstrates an extraordinary understanding of landscape and water behavior. It represents a fusion of science, engineering, art, and spirituality, an approach to knowledge that modern disciplines often separate, but ancient cultures frequently combined. Today, visitors who stand before the Sayhuite monolith see more than a carved rock. They see a puzzle left behind by a civilization that mastered the mountains of the Andes long before modern technology existed. Each channeled terrace and miniature basin hints at ideas that have yet to be fully understood. And as water still flows across the stone's intricate surface, it quietly reenacts the same patterns that fascinated its creators centuries ago. Across the foothills of the Himalayas in northern India lies one of the most enigmatic architectural achievements of the ancient world. Carved directly into a massive ridge of sandstone, the rock-cut temples of Masrur rise from the landscape like a frozen monument to an unknown past. At first glance, the complex resembles a traditional Hindu temple city, complete with towering shikaras, intricately carved facades, and a sacred courtyard. But a closer look reveals something far more extraordinary. None of these temples were built in the conventional sense. Every column wall, shrine, and tower was carved from a single continuous mass of rock. Rather than assembling stone blocks one by one, the builders removed the mountain itself to reveal an entire temple complex hidden inside it. The Masrur temples are believed to have been created sometime between the 8th and 9th centuries, though their precise origin remains uncertain. Located in the Kangra Valley of Himachal Pradesh, the site sits far from the major urban and political centers of ancient India. This isolation only deepens the mystery. Constructing such a complex would have required immense labor, advanced planning, and sophisticated knowledge of stone carving. Yet no surviving inscription clearly identifies the rulers, architects, or craftsmen responsible for the project. Historians have suggested connections to the late Gupta period or to regional Rajput dynasties, but none of these theories provide a definitive answer. The absence of clear historical records leaves Masrur suspended between archaeology and speculation. The complex itself consists of nearly 20 interconnected temples arranged around a central shrine. Their architectural style resembles the Nagara tradition of northern Indian temple design, recognizable by the vertical curving towers known as shikaras. In most cases, such structures were constructed from thousands of carefully shaped stone blocks, stacked and locked together. At Masrur, however, the same architectural language appears to have been sculpted directly from the mountain. The effect is astonishing. Columns look as if they were assembled piece by piece, yet they are part of the same solid rock. Roof lines and decorative cornices appear layered and constructed, but in reality, they were carved into the stone surface. It is an architectural illusion that blurs the line between construction and sculpture. Achieving such precision would have required extraordinary planning. When building with blocks, mistakes can often be corrected by replacing individual stones. In a monolithic structure like Masrur, every cut is permanent. Remove too much rock, and the design is ruined forever. The builders, therefore, had to visualize the entire complex before carving even began. Most researchers believe the work progressed from the top downward, gradually shaping the towers and then excavating the interior spaces beneath them. This method prevented the upper layers from collapsing during excavation, but it demanded exact calculations at every stage. The craftsmen were essentially sculpting a three-dimensional architectural blueprint into the mountainside. Inside the temples, the carvings reveal both artistic skill and religious symbolism. The central shrine is traditionally associated with the Hindu deity Shiva, though other deities such as Vishnu and various forms of the divine feminine may also have been worshipped here. Niches carved into the walls once contained statues and ritual objects, many of which have been lost over time. Even so, the remaining features suggest that Masrur was not merely a monument, but an active center of spiritual practice. Pilgrims may have traveled across the valley to perform rituals within these rock-cut sanctuaries, bringing offerings and prayers into chambers carved directly into the heart of the mountain. One of the most striking features of the site lies just beyond the temples themselves. In front of the complex is a large rectangular water tank carefully shaped to reflect the stone towers rising above it. On calm days, the temples appear mirrored in the water with almost perfect symmetry. This reflection pool may have served practical and ritual purposes. Water reservoirs were often associated with purification ceremonies in Hindu temple traditions. At Masrur, however, the placement of the pool also enhances the visual drama of the architecture. The mirrored towers create the impression of a doubled temple city, one carved from stone, and the other floating on the surface of the water. Despite the sophistication of the complex signs throughout the site, suggest that the project may never have been fully completed. Certain sections show rough surfaces and unfinished carving marks, as if the craftsmen abruptly stopped their work. Some decorative details appear partially shaped, hinting that additional temples or sculptures might once have been planned. Archaeologists have debated why the construction might have been abandoned. Possible explanations include political upheaval, the collapse of patronage, or natural disasters in the region. Without written records, the reasons remain unknown, leaving Masrur frozen in a moment of unfinished ambition. Nature itself would eventually play a dramatic role in the site's history. In 1905, a powerful earthquake struck the Kangra region, one of the most devastating seismic events in the area's recorded past. The tremors damaged many historical structures across the valley, and Masrur was no exception. Several of the temple towers collapsed during the quake, leaving the complex partially ruined. Yet the surviving structures demonstrated remarkable resilience. Even after centuries of exposure and a violent earthquake, large portions of the monolithic complex remained standing. The durability of the design suggests that the ancient builders possessed an impressive understanding of structural balance and rock stability. Today, the rock-cut temples of Masrur stand as both a historical monument and an architectural puzzle. Visitors walking through the complex encounter a place that feels simultaneously ancient and strangely modern. The idea of sculpting an entire temple city from a single rock mass seems almost inconceivable, even with contemporary technology. For early medieval craftsmen to achieve this, using only chisels, hammers, and careful planning, raises profound questions about the level of engineering knowledge present in the region at the time. Masrur is sometimes compared to other rock-cut wonders of India, such as the temples of Ellora or the monolithic Kailasa temple, yet its isolated location and incomplete history give it a distinctive aura. Unlike larger temple cities surrounded by extensive inscriptions and historical references, Masrur remains largely silent about its origins. The stone itself is the only surviving testimony to the vision of its creators. As the sun moves across the Kangra Valley, shadows slide slowly across the carved towers, revealing details that might otherwise go unnoticed. Every groove and column records the patient labor of artisans who transformed a natural cliff into a sacred landscape. Their names have disappeared from history, but their work endures in the sandstone walls that still rise above the valley. In many ways, the rock-cut temples of Masrur represent one of archaeology's most compelling paradoxes. The site is physically undeniable, an entire temple complex carved from a mountain, yet the story behind it remains incomplete. Who conceived such an ambitious project? What techniques allowed craftsmen to execute such precise carvings, and why was the work seemingly abandoned before reaching its full potential? Until new discoveries emerge, the temples of Masrur will continue to stand as a silent riddle in stone, a reminder that the ancient world still holds secrets waiting to be understood. Near the historic city of Nanjing lies one of the most astonishing yet little-known relics of ancient engineering, the colossal stone blocks of Yangshan megalith. Hidden within the mountains of the Yangshan quarry, these immense carved masses of limestone represent an unfinished project, so ambitious that even today it challenges our understanding of historical construction. What remains at the site is not merely a quarry. It is the silent evidence of a plan that, had it been completed, would have produced the largest stone monument ever created by human hands. The story begins in the early 15th century during the reign of Yongle, emperor, one of the most powerful rulers of the Ming dynasty. Known for monumental projects and grand imperial architecture, the Yongle emperor ordered the creation of an enormous stone stele to honor his father, the founding emperor of the dynasty. This monument was intended to stand at the imperial mausoleum complex, now known as Mingxiaoling Mausoleum. Imperial steles were common symbols of honor in Chinese tradition, but what Yongle envisioned went far beyond tradition. His monument would dwarf every stone stele ever constructed. To build it, workers turned to the mountains of Yangshan, a quarry already famous for its high-quality limestone. Their teams of stonecutters began carving 3 gigantic sections directly from the bedrock of the mountain. The design followed the traditional structure of Chinese monumental steles, a massive base, a tall central slab containing inscriptions, and a sculpted crown that would often feature dragons or other imperial symbols. But at Yangshan, the scale of these pieces defied anything previously attempted. The base alone measures roughly 30 meters in length and nearly 13 meters in height. The central slab, intended to hold the engraved inscription, would have risen more than 50 meters tall. Above it would sit the crown, carved with intricate imperial imagery. When assembled, the completed monument would have reached an extraordinary height of around 73 meters. In terms of scale, it would have been closer to the height of a modern building than a traditional monument. The true shock, however, lies in the weight. The 3 sections combined are estimated to weigh more than 31,000 tons. To place this into perspective, the largest stone blocks used in the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh only a fraction of that amount. Even the famous monolithic statues of Easter Island rarely exceed 80 tons. The Yangshan stone components exceed these figures by an almost unimaginable margin. No known stone monument in human history approaches this mass. Yet despite the enormous effort required to carve these blocks, the project was never completed. The stones remain exactly where they were cut, still partially attached to the mountain, frozen in time, as if the workers had simply walked away. Historical records suggest that once the massive pieces were nearly finished, the builders realized a devastating truth: the stones were far too large to transport. The distance from Yangshan Quarry to the Mingxiaoling Mausoleum is roughly 15 kilometers. Even today, moving a 30,000-ton structure across mountainous terrain would require heavy industrial equipment, specially reinforced roads, and advanced lifting systems. In the 15th century, transportation technology relied primarily on wooden sledges, rollers, animal power, and human labor. Although the Ming dynasty achieved remarkable feats of engineering, including major expansions of the Great Wall of China and the construction of the imperial palace complex known as the Forbidden City, nothing in their technological repertoire appears capable of moving stones of such magnitude. This raises one of the central mysteries of the Yangshan megalith. The stonecutters of the Ming dynasty were highly experienced craftsmen. Quarrying operations across China had produced enormous architectural blocks for centuries. It seems unlikely that such skilled engineers would miscalculate the transportability of their own project. Yet the sheer size of the Yangshan blocks suggests that someone intentionally ordered them to be cut on this impossible scale. Close examination of the quarry reveals that the carving itself was performed with extraordinary precision. Long, straight channels marked the boundaries where the stones were separated from the mountain. The surfaces are surprisingly flat, and the geometry of the blocks indicates careful planning rather than rough extraction. Workers likely used traditional quarrying methods involving chisels, wedges, and controlled fracturing along natural stone layers. Even with these tools, shaping a block of this size would have required enormous manpower and meticulous coordination. In many ways, the quarry resembles a frozen construction site. The base block lies partly detached, but never removed. The massive central slab remains embedded in the mountainside. The crown piece rests nearby, already shaped but never transported. Standing beside these colossal forms, one cannot escape the sense that the project halted suddenly, leaving behind the physical evidence of an ambition that exceeded practical limits. Scholars continue to debate exactly why the project was abandoned. One possibility is that the builders initially underestimated the final weight of the stone sections. Another theory suggests that the emperor's advisors eventually realized the logistical impossibility of transporting such massive pieces and persuaded the court to cancel the plan before further resources were wasted. Some historians believe the monument may have been intentionally designed on such a scale to symbolize imperial power, even if its completion proved unrealistic. Whatever the explanation, the Yangshan megalith stands today as one of the most extraordinary, unfinished constructions in human history. It represents not merely a quarry or a failed monument, but a glimpse into the immense ambitions of a powerful empire. The Ming dynasty sought to immortalize its legacy in stone, and for a moment in history, it attempted something that surpassed every known precedent. Today, the enormous blocks remain in the mountains of Yangshan, weathered by centuries, yet still astonishing in scale. Visitors who walk through the quarry encounter a surreal scene: 3 gigantic pieces of a monument that was never assembled, each larger than almost any stone ever moved by ancient civilizations. The site feels less like a ruin and more like a paused moment in time, preserved across 600 years. The Yangshan megalith raises questions that continue to intrigue historians, engineers, and archaeologists alike. Why was such an impossibly large monument planned in the first place? Did its designers truly believe it could be transported, or was the project driven by imperial ambition that overshadowed practical reality? Whatever the answers may be, the silent stones of Yangshan remain one of the most striking reminders of humanity's relentless desire to build bigger, higher, and more enduring monuments. And in the shadow of those unfinished giants, we are left to imagine what the world's largest stone monument might have looked like had it ever been completed. Across the remote islands of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of kilometers from any major continent, lies one of the most astonishing and least understood archaeological sites on Earth. On the eastern shore of Pompeii stands Nanmadol, an ancient stone city built directly on top of a coral reef lagoon. Unlike most ancient ruins scattered across deserts or buried beneath jungles, Nanmadol rises from the ocean itself, a labyrinth of artificial islets, stone walls, and narrow canals that have stood silently for centuries. To those who first encountered it, the site seemed almost impossible, as if a massive fortress had been assembled in a place where no such structure should exist. Nanmadol is often referred to as the Venice of the Pacific, but this comparison barely captures the extraordinary nature of the site. The city is composed of nearly 100 small artificial islands, each carefully constructed atop coral foundations. These islets are separated by tidal canals that allow seawater to flow between them, forming a complex grid-like layout across the lagoon. Some islands contain massive ceremonial platforms, others once held residences for priests and elites, while several served as burial sites for rulers of the ancient dynasty that once governed the region. Together, they form an urban landscape unlike any other known in the Pacific world. The civilization responsible for building Nan Madol flourished under the rule of the Sodalur dynasty, a powerful line of chiefs who controlled the island for several centuries. Archaeologists generally place the major construction of Nan Madol between the 12th and 17th centuries. During this period, the city served as both a political and religious capital, where rulers consolidated power, conducted rituals, and oversaw the surrounding communities of Pohnpei. Yet despite its importance, no written records from the builders themselves survive. What remains today are only the silent stones and the oral traditions preserved by the island's descendants. At first glance, Nan Madol may appear to be simply another set of ruins, but closer inspection reveals a construction technique that raises profound questions. The walls and platforms of the city are made from enormous columns of basalt, a volcanic rock that naturally forms into long hexagonal shapes as it cools. These columns resemble gigantic stone logs, some reaching several meters in length and weighing many tons. Rather than cutting the stones into regular blocks, the builders stacked these basalt logs horizontally in alternating layers, creating massive walls that sometimes reach heights of 8 meters and thicknesses of several meters. The scale of the construction is staggering. Individual basalt pieces can weigh between 5 and 25 tons, and the total amount of stone used across the entire site is estimated to reach hundreds of thousands of tons. Transporting such enormous materials would be challenging even with modern equipment. Yet the builders of Nan Madol accomplished this without metal tools, cranes, or wheeled vehicles. Even more puzzling is the fact that the basalt columns used in construction do not naturally occur at the site itself. They likely originated from volcanic formations on other parts of the island, meaning that ancient workers somehow quarried, transported, and positioned these massive stones across water. How exactly this was achieved remains one of the greatest mysteries surrounding Nan Madol. Some researchers propose that the builders transported the columns by raft, floating them along the coastline and into the lagoon before lifting them into place. Others suggest that elaborate wooden scaffolding systems may have been used. However, no definitive evidence has yet been found to confirm these theories. The logistical challenge of moving such heavy materials across the sea with limited technology continues to puzzle archaeologists. Another remarkable feature of Nan Madol is the precision of its architecture. Many of the basalt columns interlock with surprising stability, even though the builders used no mortar or binding material between them. The stones were simply stacked and balanced in a method sometimes compared to a giant stone lattice. Despite centuries of tropical storms, tidal erosion, and earthquakes, large sections of the walls remain standing today. This durability suggests that the builders possessed a deep understanding of structural stability and the properties of the materials they were using. Within the maze of canals and stone platforms lies the heart of Nan Madol's ceremonial complex, known as Nandawas. This massive enclosure is surrounded by towering basalt walls that create one of the most imposing structures in the entire city. Inside this compound were the tombs of Sodalur rulers, along with sacred spaces used for rituals and funerary ceremonies. The The sheer size of the walls surrounding Nandawas gives the impression of a fortress built to guard something of great importance. Yet the exact nature of the ceremonies performed there remains largely unknown. Over time, Nanmadol gradually lost its central role in Pohnpei society. Around the 17th century, the Sodlur dynasty collapsed, following a rebellion that reshaped the island's political landscape. After this upheaval, the city was slowly abandoned. Without maintenance, vegetation began to reclaim the structures and the canals filled with sediment. The once vibrant ceremonial center became a silent ruin, surrounded by mangrove forests and shallow seawater. Despite its abandonment, Nanmadol continued to live on in local legends. According to traditional stories from Pohnpei, the city was built by two powerful brothers named Olosopa and Olosipa. These figures were said to possess supernatural abilities that allowed them to command the stones to move through the air. In the stories, massive basalt columns floated across the ocean and gently lowered themselves into place, forming the foundations of the great city. While modern scholars view these tales as mythological, they reflect the deep cultural significance of Nanmadol and the awe it inspired among the island's inhabitants. For early European explorers and later archaeologists, Nanmadol presented a challenge to conventional assumptions about Pacific Island societies. The sheer scale of the construction seemed inconsistent with the relatively small population of Pohnpei during ancient times. Building and maintaining such a massive complex would have required a coordinated labor force, strong political authority, and extensive knowledge of engineering. These factors suggest that the society that built Nanmadol was far more organized and technologically capable than earlier researchers once believed. Today, Nanmadol stands as one of the most unique archaeological landscapes on the planet. Unlike monumental cities built on land, this ancient complex exists at the boundary between sea and stone. The tides continue to flow through its canals, just as they did centuries ago, and the basalt walls still rise above the lagoon like the remnants of a forgotten maritime kingdom. Modern researchers continue to study the site using new technologies, including aerial mapping, underwater surveys, and geological analysis. Each investigation reveals additional details about how the city was constructed and how it functioned within the broader culture of Pohnpei. Yet many questions remain unanswered. How were the massive basalt columns transported across water? Why was such an enormous ceremonial center built on a coral reef instead of solid land? And what forces led to its sudden abandonment? In many ways, Nanmadol represents the enduring mystery of ancient human achievement. It demonstrates that complex engineering and monumental architecture could emerge even in the most remote regions of the world. The city challenges assumptions about the limits of early societies and reminds us that human ingenuity often appears in places where we least expect it. Rising quietly from the waters of the Pacific, Nanmadol continues to stand as a testament to a lost chapter of history. Its towering basalt walls, silent canals, and scattered ceremonial platforms form a stone puzzle that has endured for centuries. Until its secrets are fully understood, the ancient city will remain one of the most intriguing and enigmatic monuments ever built by human hands. Across the dry plains of the Sonoran Desert, in what is now Arizona, stands one of the most unusual ancient structures in North America, the massive adobe complex preserved today within Casa Grande Ruins National Monument. Rising from the desert floor like a weathered fortress of earth, the structure known as the Great House has puzzled historians and archaeologists for more than a century. Built roughly 700 years ago by the ancient Hohokam civilization, this towering building remains one of the largest prehistoric adobe constructions ever discovered north of Mexico. Yet despite decades of excavation and research, the true purpose of this monument, the techniques used to build it, and the fate of the people who created it remain surrounded by mystery. The Great House is an imposing structure made primarily from caliche, a hardened mixture of desert soil, clay, sand, and calcium carbonate that forms naturally in arid environments. While caliche can be extremely durable, once dried, constructing a multi-story building from this material in the harsh desert climate would have required remarkable planning and engineering. The walls of the Great House are astonishingly thick, nearly 1 meter in some sections, and the building originally stood around 4 stories high. Even after centuries of exposure to wind, heat, and erosion, large portions of the structure still stand today. The durability alone raises questions about the level of architectural knowledge possessed by the people who built it. Unlike many ancient buildings constructed with stone blocks or timber frames, the Great House contains no visible wooden support structure. Instead, the walls themselves carry the weight of the entire building. Layers of wet caliche were stacked and allowed to dry, gradually forming massive solid walls capable of supporting upper levels. For a society without metal tools or draft animals, transporting and shaping the necessary materials would have been a monumental task. Archaeologists believe the builders likely carried wet soil by hand in baskets, compacting it layer by layer as the structure slowly rose above the desert landscape. But the greatest mystery surrounding Casa Grande is not simply how it was built, it is why it was built at all. When Spanish explorers first encountered the ruins in the late 17th century, they were astonished by the massive earthen building standing alone in the desert. They called it Casa Grande, meaning Great House. Yet the name itself reveals how little they understood about its original function. Unlike a typical dwelling, the structure contains relatively few living spaces and lacks many features expected in a residential complex. Instead, it appears to have served a purpose that was far more symbolic, ceremonial, or administrative. Some researchers believe the Great House may have functioned as the center of a regional settlement, possibly serving as the residence or ceremonial center of a ruling elite. The surrounding area once contained numerous smaller structures, plazas, and compounds that formed a large hokum community. From the upper levels of the Great House, leaders may have been able to oversee the surrounding agricultural fields and irrigation canals that sustained the population. However, another theory suggests that the building may have been used as a prehistoric astronomical observatory. Several openings in the walls appear to align with the rising or setting positions of the sun during important moments of the year, particularly the summer and winter solstices. During these times, sunlight passes through certain openings and illuminates specific areas inside the structure. These alignments have led some scholars to believe that the Great House functioned as a kind of calendar, helping ancient inhabitants track seasonal cycles that were crucial for agriculture in the desert environment. If this interpretation is correct, Casa Grande would belong to a global tradition of ancient monuments designed with astronomical precision. Sites such as Stonehenge in England and Chichén Itzá in Mexico demonstrate how many early civilizations integrated architecture with celestial observation. The possibility that the Hohokam constructed a similar system in the deserts of Arizona suggests a sophisticated understanding of the sky and its cycles. Yet the Great House was not an isolated structure. It existed within a much larger and equally impressive technological achievement, the vast irrigation network of the Hohokam people. Centuries before European contact, the Hohokam engineered one of the most extensive irrigation systems ever built in ancient North America. Using simple tools and immense labor, they carved hundreds of kilometers of canals through the desert, diverting water from the Gila River to their fields and settlements. Some of these canals were several meters wide and stretched for many kilometers across the landscape. Through this system, the Hohokam transformed an otherwise hostile desert into productive farmland, capable of sustaining large communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that tens of thousands of people may have lived within the Hohokam cultural region at its peak. Their settlements included ball courts, platform mounds, extensive trade networks, and sophisticated craft traditions. Shell jewelry from the Gulf of California, copper bells from Mesoamerica, and finely crafted pottery have all been discovered within Hohokam sites, indicating long-distance trade connections across the Southwest and beyond. Given such achievements, the fate of the Hohokam civilization is one of the most perplexing mysteries surrounding Casa Grande. Sometime around the 15th century, the great settlements of the Hohokam were gradually abandoned. The canals fell silent. The fields dried. Communities that had thrived for centuries simply disappeared from the archaeological record. By the time Europeans arrived in the region, the cities and irrigation systems had already been deserted. What caused this collapse remains uncertain. Some researchers believe that long-term drought may have strained the delicate irrigation network beyond its limits. Others suggest that catastrophic flooding may have damaged canal systems that required constant maintenance. Environmental changes, soil salinization from centuries of irrigation, internal social conflict, or population migration could also have contributed to the decline. But none of these explanations fully account for the sudden disappearance of such a complex society. Standing today beneath the protective shelter, the great house of Casa Grande continues to overlook the desert just as it did centuries ago. Its silent walls have endured scorching summers, violent monsoon storms, and generations of human curiosity. Yet the people who built it left behind no written language, no surviving oral record explaining its purpose, and no definitive clues about their final fate. What remains is a monumental structure made of earth, rising unexpectedly from the desert landscape, a reminder that ancient North America once hosted civilizations capable of remarkable engineering, astronomical observation, and large-scale environmental management. Casa Grande challenges modern assumptions about prehistoric societies in the American Southwest. It suggests that the Hohokam possessed knowledge and organizational abilities far greater than previously imagined. And even now, with modern archaeology and scientific analysis, many of its secrets remain buried beneath the desert sands. The great house still stands watching the same sunrise and sunset that its builders observed hundreds of years ago. And with every passing year, one question continues to echo through the ruins. What exactly was this desert monument truly built for? On the Giza Plateau in Egypt, directly in front of the colossal statue known as the Great Sphinx of Giza, stands a structure that is often overshadowed by its famous neighbor, yet remains one of the most intriguing architectural mysteries of the ancient world, the Sphinx Temple. Weathered by thousands of years of desert winds and shifting sands, this massive stone complex appears silent and empty today. But its design materials and unexplained construction techniques continue to provoke questions that archaeologists and historians still debate. The temple is part of the larger Giza pyramid complex, yet its purpose and the full story behind its creation remain uncertain. The Sphinx Temple is widely believed to date to around 2500 BCE during Egypt's 4th dynasty, often associated with the reign of the pharaoh Khafra. However, unlike many Egyptian monuments, that clearly identify their builders through inscriptions and carvings, this temple contains almost no written records revealing who commissioned it or exactly how it was used. The absence of inscriptions is unusual for a monumental structure in ancient Egypt, where rulers typically documented their achievements in stone. Because of this silence, the temple has become a puzzle one, where architecture itself is almost the only remaining source of clues. One of the most striking aspects of the Sphinx temple is the sheer scale of the stones used in its construction. The structure was built from enormous blocks of limestone, many weighing between 50 and 200 tons. These blocks form the core of the temple walls and foundations, fitted together with remarkable precision. Standing inside the temple today, one can still see these gigantic stones forming dark corridors and massive chambers. Their edges are sharply cut, and many appear to have been placed with an accuracy that leaves only minimal gaps between them. For modern observers, the obvious question emerges: how did builders working over 4,000 years ago move and position such immense stones without modern machinery? Even more intriguing is the origin of some of the temple's materials. While the outer structure is made primarily of local limestone from the Giza Plateau, the interior once featured polished granite columns and wall coverings brought from Aswan, a region located hundreds of kilometers to the south along the Nile. Granite is an extremely hard stone, far more difficult to quarry and shape than limestone. Ancient Egyptian craftsmen worked it using tools that were primarily made from copper and stone. Yet the surfaces they produced often appear smooth and carefully finished. The logistics alone raise questions. Massive granite blocks had to be quarried, transported along the Nile, unloaded, and then hauled up to the plateau before being installed inside the temple. Even today, reconstructing the full process remains a challenge for historians attempting to understand the engineering behind such projects. The layout of the Sphinx temple itself is another element that invites curiosity. The structure follows a strikingly symmetrical plan. 2 rows of massive pillars once lined the interior halls, leading toward open courtyards and ceremonial spaces. The central court, surrounded by towering stone walls, would have been illuminated by the Egyptian sun, while the surrounding corridors remained in shadow. This contrast between light and darkness may have been intentional, possibly connected to ritual symbolism. In ancient Egyptian religion, architecture was often designed to represent cosmic order, the journey of the sun, or the rebirth of the pharaoh. Some researchers therefore suspect that the temple was part of a ritual pathway connected to the solar cycle and royal funerary ceremonies. Another theory suggests that the Sphinx temple was directly integrated into the construction of the Great Sphinx itself. Geological studies of the plateau indicate that the limestone blocks used in the temple may have come from the very trench carved out when the Sphinx statue was sculpted from the bedrock. If this interpretation is correct, the temple and the statue were conceived as part of a single architectural project. The stone removed while carving the Sphinx would have been reused to build the temple, creating a monumental complex that combined sculpture and architecture into one unified design. Such planning would demonstrate an impressive level of coordination in ancient construction. Yet despite these impressive features, the true function of the Sphinx temple remains unclear. Unlike many temples in Egypt that contain statues, inscriptions, and evidence of long-term ritual activity, the Sphinx temple appears surprisingly austere. Archaeologists have found little decoration inside its chambers, suggesting that the temple may have served a highly specific ceremonial purpose, rather than daily religious worship. Some scholars propose that it was used for the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual intended to symbolically restore life to the spirit of a deceased pharaoh. Others believe it may have played a role in solar worship, linking the Sphinx, often associated with the rising sun, to the divine cycle of rebirth and kingship. There are also geological debates surrounding the area around the Sphinx and its neighboring temple. Certain researchers have pointed to patterns of erosion on the surrounding limestone, suggesting that some of the weathering might have been caused by heavy rainfall rather than wind and sand alone. If this interpretation were accurate, it could imply that parts of the complex date back to a period when the climate of Egypt was significantly wetter than it is today. While this idea remains controversial and is not widely accepted within mainstream archaeology, it illustrates how many aspects of the Sphinx complex still invite investigation. Standing in the shadow of the Great Sphinx, the temple feels both monumental and strangely enigmatic. Its enormous stones, carefully aligned halls, and silent chambers hint at a sophisticated architectural vision from ancient Egypt's most powerful era. Yet unlike many other structures on the Giza Plateau, the Sphinx Temple offers few direct explanations about its builders, its rituals, or the precise meaning behind its design. Instead, it leaves behind a carefully constructed puzzle made of stone. Over 4,000 years after its construction, the Sphinx Temple continues to challenge researchers who attempt to understand the full scope of ancient Egyptian engineering and religious symbolism. Was it a ceremonial gateway for the afterlife of a pharaoh, a solar temple aligned with cosmic cycles, or simply one component of a much larger architectural plan surrounding the Great Sphinx and the pyramids of Giza? The answers remain uncertain. But the temple's enduring presence beside the ancient statue ensures that the mystery of the Sphinx complex continues to captivate historians, archaeologists, and curious observers around the world. Across the landscape of our planet, ancient rocks preserve stories that stretch far beyond written history. Layers of stone record volcanic eruptions, shifting continents, and the gradual transformation of Earth over hundreds of millions of years. Yet occasionally, something appears within those rocks that seems strangely familiar, something that looks almost human. In a remote region of South Africa, one such anomaly has captured the imagination of explorers, researchers, and mystery enthusiasts alike. Embedded in a solid outcrop of granite lies what appears to be a massive human footprint, preserved in stone and surrounded by one unsettling question: how could something like this exist? The formation is widely known as the Mpuluzi Giant Footprint, named after the nearby Mpuluzi River region in Mpumalanga province. At first glance, it looks unmistakable. The shape resembles a human foot, pressed deeply into rock, complete with the outline of a heel, an arch, and 5 distinct toes. Its proportions appear natural, as though a gigantic human once stepped onto the stone surface and left behind a permanent impression. What makes the discovery so intriguing is not simply the shape of the mark, but the geological context in which it appears. The footprint is carved into granite, one of the hardest and most ancient types of rock on Earth. The footprint measures roughly 1.2 meters in length, far larger than any human foot ever recorded. If the proportions followed the average anatomical ratios of the human body, the individual who made such a footprint would have stood approximately 7 to 8 meters tall, towering over modern humans. This immense scale immediately pushes the discovery into the realm of speculation. Was it a symbolic carving, a geological illusion, or something else entirely? The shape itself appears remarkably consistent with the structure of a human foot. The heel is rounded, the arch slopes inward, and the toes extend forward in a pattern similar to the anatomy of modern humans. The big toe sits slightly apart from the others, a characteristic typical of human footprints rather than animal tracks. Such details have led many observers to argue that the resemblance is simply too precise to be random. Standing beside the mark, it is difficult to ignore the strange feeling that someone or something once stood there. From a geological perspective, the most puzzling aspect of the Mpuluzi footprint is the rock itself. The mark appears on granite, a type of igneous rock formed deep underground when molten magma slowly cools and solidifies. Granite is extremely hard and resistant to erosion. Unlike soft mud or sediment, it does not easily preserve impressions. In typical fossil formation, footprints are created when an animal steps into wet sediment, such as mud or sand. Over time, layers of sediment cover the impression and eventually turn into stone, preserving the track as a fossilized footprint. Granite, however, does not form in this way. It crystallizes under immense heat and pressure beneath the Earth's surface. Because of this, the idea of a living creature leaving a footprint in granite seems impossible. This contradiction is at the heart of the mystery. If the rock was already solid when the footprint appeared, then it could not have been made by simply stepping onto it. Some sources claim that the granite formation surrounding the footprint dates back hundreds of millions of years, sometimes even suggesting an age of around 200 million years. These claims have fueled the legend of the 200-million-year-old footprint, often circulating in documentaries and online discussions. However, geologists caution that the age of the rock does not necessarily mean the footprint itself formed at the same time. Granite formations can be extremely old, but surface features such as erosion patterns can appear much later. Still, the ancient nature of the stone adds to the fascination. Standing before the footprint, one is looking at rock that formed long before the age of dinosaurs had ended. Many scientists believe the Mpuluzi footprint is an example of natural weathering rather than a true footprint. Over long periods of time, water temperature changes and chemical processes slowly erode rock surfaces. Cracks develop, minerals break down, and fragments of stone detach from the surface. In rare cases, these processes can create shapes that resemble familiar objects. This phenomenon is known as pareidolia, the human tendency to recognize meaningful shapes in random patterns. The same psychological effect causes people to see faces in clouds or animals in rock formations. From this perspective, the footprint may simply be a coincidence created by the uneven weathering of granite. Certain minerals erode faster than others, leaving depressions that gradually form recognizable shapes. Yet even those who support this explanation often admit that the resemblance is unusually striking. Because of its dramatic appearance, the Mpuluzi footprint has inspired a wide range of alternative interpretations. Some speculate that it may represent a prehistoric carving created intentionally by ancient people as a symbolic monument. Throughout history, many cultures carved footprints into stone as sacred symbols representing gods, ancestors, or legendary heroes. Others have taken the idea even further, suggesting that the footprint could be evidence of giants mentioned in ancient myths. Stories of enormous humanoid beings appear in many cultures around the world, from biblical Nephilim to giant warriors in African folklore. There are also more speculative theories proposing unknown civilizations or lost chapters of human history. While such ideas capture the imagination, they remain outside the boundaries of accepted scientific evidence. Whether the Mpuluzi giant footprint is the product of erosion symbolism or simple coincidence, its existence highlights something profound about our relationship with the past. Humans are naturally drawn to mysteries carved into the landscape. A single unusual shape in stone can ignite questions about ancient worlds, forgotten cultures and possibilities that stretch far beyond our current understanding. Standing beside the footprint today, visitors often feel a moment of curiosity that echoes across time. Was it formed by natural forces, patiently sculpting granite over thousands of years? Or is it a reminder of stories that have yet to be fully understood? The rock itself offers no answers. It simply remains there silent and enduring, waiting for each new observer to interpret its shape. The Mpuluzi giant footprint may never be definitively explained. For scientists, it serves as an interesting geological curiosity. For others, it represents a tantalizing puzzle, an imprint that appears almost human in a place where no human footprint should exist. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the mystery is not the footprint itself, but the way it challenges perception. A single mark in stone can shift the line between science and imagination, reminding us that even in a world mapped by satellites and studied by laboratories, there are still places where questions linger. And sometimes those questions begin with something as simple and as extraordinary as a footprint in ancient rock.